everyone to the BBVA lecture series, Demography Today lecture series, sponsored by the Foundation, and then co-sponsored by the European Society of Historical Demography and the ERC project, ECO project, from the CSIC and coordinated from CSIC. We have the pleasure to have today Nicola Barban. He's a professor of demography at the University of Bologna in Italy and an international co-investigator of the ESRC Research Center on Micro-Social Change in the United Kingdom. He's the principal investigator of the ERC Consolidator Grant Jampop, Genes, Genealogies and Evolution of Demographic Change and Social Inequality. ERC projects are the flagship of research in Europe, and so it's a great honor that he got it and that he's here to talk about his project. His research focuses on demography, socioeconomics, social interactions, and life course analysis. He's an expert on that area. His work has been published in high impact factor journals such as Nature Genetics, Nature Human Behavior, and American Sociological Review, and he is the author, together with Melina Mills and with Felix Trop, two others ERCs of the textbook An Introduction to Statistical Genetic Analysis, edited by Mead Press. So, as usual, Nicola, we have around 40 minutes to 45 minutes for your presentation. Thank you very much for coming to Madrid. I know that the ERC is quite demanding for the IB, so that you have time to come here just to talk about your project is a great pleasure for us.
What I'm going to talk today is a bit about my Jampop project that has started recently, but I think I want to say something about some ideas around this project, and I hear from you your comments and suggestions, so on. And what in particular, something that it's quite interesting to me recently is the use of different type of data for the study on demographic processes. So the title of this presentation is Big Data from the Past, Internet-Based Genealogy and Demographic Research. That's, so when studying population, there are two main factors that need to be taken into account. The first is that when what we observe today, so the contemporaneous trends, are actually the outcome of past social processes. This means how people marry to each other, migration patterns, and also the degree of transmission across a generation from parents to children and so on. So for this, however, in most of the demographic research today, we look at contemporaneous population trends, and we focus only on a very recent aspect without looking at the big picture. So one particular and important thing to do, I believe, is to enlarge our vision and go from a short-term to long-term approach. The second fundamental issue, if you want, is that the demographic change develop in time over multiple generations through complex family networks. So we shouldn't look at individuals only, but we should include families as possibly as or kinship network as a unit of analysis. However, most of the theories and models are based on individuals. And why is that? Because probably lack of data and not these are actually very simple statement, but because of lack of data, we couldn't go too much into these two aspects. So the idea of the Jampop project, in a nutshell, is that we focus on family networks as the main driver of long population change and diversity. So that we try to shift from short to long, from individuals to families. We all know that demography has been a data-driven discipline since its birth. So this is the Bills of Mortality from John Grant, that he studied the birth and death register published weekly and annually in the London Times in the 17th century. And from there on, the innovation in data also drove innovation in methods and also in type of question that we could solve. And I believe that we are in a time of unprecedented wealth of data and also methodological developments in data across time and on families. And I would mention 3 different sources of data here. The first one is the emergence of so-called internet-based and sometimes referred as a genealogy-driven social network. So these are the websites in which you can go and fill your family tree and information about your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, ancestors. They are often described as social networks because what these websites do is to put in connection people. So my family tree, and they say, okay, maybe this great great-grandparent of you is the uncle of this other person, so you bring some information to the family tree, and the other user, actually customer, brings other information. This information can be merged and convalidated and so on with the goal of creating a larger family network of population. This data, and I will talk extensively on this in this presentation, are multi-generational by construction, but also transnational. They are not referring to a particular geographic place. The second type of data that is emerging is the census microdata, particularly historical census microdata that are being released in many countries, particularly in the US. This year with the 1951 census will be released. In the UK, the 1921 census is being released. And this data contain the full count of the population, with name, surname, all the information that were collected in that particular census. And there are a lot of effort and different teams across the world to do some linkage of different census in the same country, so to track households over time, but also linking individuals from one country to another country to study migration pattern. And these are made through innovation in machine learning techniques for the linkage, on the text recognition, image recognition, and so on. So the computer science helps history and demography to understand this data. There are other sources of data that are usually referring to contemporaneous population that are surveys, traditional household surveys that include also genetic information. For example, the health retirement study in the US or the UK household panel in the UK. And this information, so that the respondents of these surveys also donate some biological samples, usually saliva, and this sample is genotyped, and we have information on the genotype. This was collected even before knowing what to do with the genetic data, but it brings a lot of information. In particular, it brings a fine-grained information on ancestry of family networks. So we can use this in household survey, for example, to study assortative mating or to study the geographical origin of the individuals. I will focus now on internet-based genealogy, and I will present some results on the project on this topic. So this is a family tree. It's actually my family tree, and I'm here. And this is my wife and my kids, my parents, and my grandparents, and so on. And it's not, I'm not a big genealogist, I'm not very good, but I filled the information up to what I knew. I asked my parents information about some uncles and so on, but I filled this information on this website is MyHeritage.com, and I could upload the DNA test, or I could buy another DNA test. I actually upload a DNA test that I took to another company, and they suggested me, this DNA test suggests me some fifth cousin that share 0.1% of DNA with me, that I recall, that I don't know anything about this, but the other thing that these websites do is to suggest possible matches of individuals that are somehow related to you, because they might think that, okay, this person might be on another genealogical tree, or could be found in the register of in the Ellis Island register of people who migrated to the US. I actually found a group of family branch that migrated to Brazil, and so on. So this website facilitated the construction of family trees. This is another website. It's called Geni.com. It's part of the same company, I believe, so that you can fill this information. You can decide either to put private trees or to have a so-called a public tree, so make discoverable to other people. And they actually they try to get people more and more to get the public data, so that they can facilitate this merge of the different trees. And this is Family Search. Family Search is part of, it's a public website. It's based on in the US, in Utah, and also has many collaboration with different countries, including the digitalization of censuses and so on. So the data I'm using now is comes from a specific project that is called FamiLinks. That is a website put together by a computer scientist and geneticist that actually got all the public profiles from one of these websites, in particular Geni.com. And it got the profiles from 80 million of people. And he published, he did, with his team, he did a great effort to clean this data, to put it available. This particular set of data is anonymized, so without name and surname. And they published a paper in Science describing this data. Their goal was primarily to study heritability in longevity, and trying to understand, because when you have a family tree, for a geneticist, it looks like a pedigree graph, so a scheme in which you have all the relatedness information, so you can derive from reported relatives, you can derive the genetic relatedness of this individual, calculate a thing, it's called heritability, that is roughly speaking, is the portion of variability on a particular trait that is, can be attributed to genetics. So they use this to do that, but they were also wanted to demonstrate that this data can be handy for other scientists. And I think that they actually are, in particular for demographers. So this information are multigenerational by construction, because there are really a family tree. So there are a collection of family trees. So we have the connection between individuals because they have children together, or because they are married, and so on. What kind of information are collected in this data? Well, we mostly have a basic demographic data. So for example, date of birth and date of death. And this can be constructed can be used to construct lifespan duration. They have also information on the birth or death place. And this data information that come from text information where people describe, oh yes, my grandparent is buried in this cemetery, can be geolocated, so we can have a map of individuals across the world. They are long-term in the sense that the size of the generation, or the multiple generation, depends on how good is the genealogist to reconstruct the family, or how many information there are available on these people. But what strikes me a lot is that there are no geographical borders. So differently from Parish data, even the fantastic Scandinavian historical data, is that we are not restricted to a particular village or a country, but we can construct families across the different countries. And actually, this is one of the reasons why people do genealogy trees, because they want to especially in countries of high migration background, they want to reconstruct their origins and their ancestry. Obviously, this data comes with a cost, not a monetary cost, but a cost in data quality. So we have, from this data, this particular version of the data, we have 86 million genealogy profiles, 5.3 million of disjoint family trees, and this was the effort of 3 million genealogists that did this large-scale crowdsourcing project. So that there was a lot of effort from the FamilyLinks team to validate this data, to remove family trees that have invalid biological topologies, meaning that a person, for example, couldn't be both the parent or the child of another person, so this invalid circles. So they did a lot of data cleaning to look at this. We have information on parent-child relationship, gender, birth location, birth year and year of death, and exact birth and date. There are, but what is interesting is that there are more data that come from this genealogy data set, sources of data that they are not included in this first release, but we recently got access to another database dump from Jenny.com, from the same sources, that is based on 2022 actually, so it's very recent, and we have now 150 million of individuals. We have information also on data on marriages, and we have both name and surname of individuals. We haven't yet started to work with that. What are the main characteristics of the data? Yes, it's not a complete population. So unlike historical registers, these are a selected sample of all the possible people living in a particular area at time. So it's biased and selected on what? Maybe on social class. We may expect that it's easier to find information of a of rich families, of important people, more difficult to have on all the rest. There is a selection of on survival, so the longer you live, the more likely is that you are in the sample, and this leads to high representation of individuals, for example, with high fertility. So the ones who got more descendants are more likely, because it's a bottom-up approach, they are more likely to be included in the sample. And there might be, of course, a record bias, so the information, the genealogies may be incomplete, and there might be some error. On the other hand, I think that we have a data of a historical population with unprecedented sample size and unprecedented length of generations. We don't have with any other data. And this is transnational, so we have information on multiple countries. We have information on migration that are notoriously difficult to get from other sources of data. And these are all on deceased people, so there's no privacy issues, so there are public use data. And to reflect a bit is also that we just started to get this big data from the past, and my impression that there will be more and more availability of this data. The big question is how much we can trust this data, how much we can do study demography on this data. And I think it's a big question from which we don't have yet an answer, but I think it's a question worth investigating. Some issue on data quality. So this is the trying to match family links data, this solid line, with the human mortality database. Depending on countries, we have different length of data. So for the US, the human mortality database, we have information from 1930s onwards. But it seems that we have for Norway, we have a better information, but we have an average correlation of age of death with life expectancy, 0.97 for the US and 95 for Norway. So we have a very good matching with the information on mortality. With some, we look at especially adult mortality, especially if we condition to surviving at a certain age. What we see is that we have much less correlation for infant mortality. So, this data look okay for data on adult mortality. Also, we can see that they reflect inequality, the decline in lifespan inequality. We can see all the long population processes by looking at this data. Here we did some tests with this data. We tried to look at something in particular on a big part of the project is on multi-generation transmission demographic behavior. And so imagine a family tree. This is usually how you describe, at least in genetics, in a pedigree graph, the family tree. And we might think that there are different channels of transmission. We might think there's biological transmission to genetics. You pass your genes to your children. But there's also socialization. There's a cultural transmission. People of the same cultural group, even if not related, pass some behavior across generations. So the question we want to look at is how intergeneration transmission demographic behavior has evolved over the last 2 centuries. In particular, we are interested on the between and within family differences in longevity and fertility. And we think this is an important question because it can say something on social inequalities, how much we believe that we need to look past to look at have a larger time frame to look at these processes. So these are the data on average age of death by birth year. We went to the maximum we could go. There's a lot of noise in the early period, and you see there's an increase average age of death. This is the work of a postdoc of Jampop, is Saverio Minardi, and now we see that we use data from the 5 countries with the largest sample size in birth cohort. You see that these data are predominantly US based. And here we look at the trends in mean age of death conditional having lived until 30. So what we did moving cohorts of 10 years, I think. We look at the increase of lifespan of individuals. Very interesting also, we look at men and women. We see that in different countries crossover of men and female age of death so at a certain point. So also gender differences are quite interesting. And this is something looking at the Gini coefficient, so in the inequality. But in particular, we're focusing on two variables here. The lifespan, defined as individual deviation in age of death from cohort, country, sex, average age of death. So we look at the standard deviation from the age of death of the same cohort. And then we look also at another variable that is we define as a longevity, so dichotomous variable indicating whether individuals lived up to the 80th percentile of the cohort country sex distribution. And we did this 2 ways because I will tell you, don't have time, but there are some imprecision when data are not completely when there's measurement error, the relationship between variables are attenuated by measurement error. We believe that by looking at the longevity, we solve part of this measurement error. We look at correlation between parents and children, siblings, cousins, grandparents, and grandchildren. And we do simply by regressing the longevity of one generation on the longevity or lifespan of the other generation, and we control for a series of factors, cohort fixed effect, state of birth fixed effect, parental cohorts, sex, birth order, number of siblings, some information on migration background, some information on the precision on the data we have, and so on. What we found is that we found quite an intergenerational association of lifespan between parents and children, and we take the average age of father and mothers as an input, so the mid-parent design, also called. We find a coefficient of between 0.10 and 0.12 for all, with some, and we look at daughters and so on, and we found consistent results. We also look at association lifespan between siblings by sex, higher than parent-children correlation, so about double the size. So, we found a more gender-specific effect. So brothers are more similar to the brothers than their sisters. So that's our gender effect. And we believe that this is higher because they also share the same more family factors together. But what is actually quite interesting to me is that how this has changed over time. So we take years from 1700 to 1900, and we look at this coefficient. This we're doing by doing a moving average. So each point is a regression between a cohort. So we move this cohort using moving average, moving cohort essentially, and we see that there's a increase in correlation between parents and children longevity, with some the trend is not always completely linear, but we see a general increase over time. Okay, this is if we look at longevity, so the probability to be on the 80 percentiles, and we see similar trends. The scale is different because this is a regression on a binary outcome. So, what are the consequences of this trend? Well, we think that family become more relevant in shaping health inequalities. And this might be due from different things that we haven't tested yet, or I'm not sure that we can completely test, but we think that with the epidemiological transition, the social and family environment might become more important. And this also shows a higher between families inequality, so an increase rather than within families. And we would like to look at this. We should know more about cause of death, for example, and see if is this due to the fact that we die less and less from transmittable diseases and from other causes. We have some information on the data, but these are very messy. We have a lot of, for example, people died because of killed by Indians or scalped by Indians, so it's very difficult to classify in a coherent way. A second area of research of Jampop is to look at assortative mating. Assortative mating is the degree to which spouses are similar. So, and similarity can come from different sources. Could be education, could be health, could be geographical origin. And we believe that this it's very important because it has an effect on the social closure of different groups. And so basically marriage acts as a force that unites different families. How similar are these families? It's very important. And by looking at genealogical data, we can also look not only at individual differences or similarities, but we can see more information on the family of origin. We also plan to use genetics for this type of project, but we haven't, but this is mostly on genealogy data. So this is some work that Giulia Corti, another postdoc of our group, is doing. She's looking at assortative mating by age, by geographical origin, and she's looking if there's an exchange between geographical origin and age. In particular, she's looking at individually in the US, because it's the biggest sample of the data, and also because there's obviously the US has this history of mass migration that we can exploit by looking at the migration background of individuals. We define with this data, we define spouses, those individuals who have children together. So this is another limitation for now, because for this data we don't have specific information on marriages, we only have the trees. So these are not all the spouses, but this is all the couples with children. So you also see that samples, we also restrict to people that have individual place of birth and death, partners information, and so on. And so we end up with a very tiny sample size compared to the big samples. But what is interesting is that by cohort, we see a decrease in age differences. Well, we actually see an increase around 80-50 in the US of age difference between spouses, and then a continuous decrease over time. So spouses are becoming more similar in age. And then what we are doing, we're looking at the degree of heterogamy and homogamy, so marrying some people from the same group, homogamy, versus marrying someone from another group, heterogamy, by migration background. And it's quite interesting that we see that by migration background, we see if either you are a migrant, so you were born in another country, and then you died in the US, or your parent was a migrant, so second generation migrants. And we see a decrease in homogamy of migration background and increase. And this seems has something to do with the different migration waves in the US. And we see also Julia is doing some work to see if there is an exchange between age differences and migration background, so to see this dynamic. And also if there is some persistence of marriage homogamy by migration background over generations. Why this is interesting, and well, this completes the work that can be done with census data, completes because of the time scale is much longer than what we can have from census data. We can have this intergenerational persistence. We can look at second generation and so on. We need more work, and possibly with the new version of the data, also to distinguish by different geographical groups. Another thing that we can do with this data is to study migration, and migration as a long-term effect on multiple generations. It affects the kinship availability, intergenerational transfer, and by looking at genealogy data, we can also compare individuals from the same family of origin that migrated or not, or that went to different places. And this is impossible to do with other data unless we link different censuses across the place. We want to focus on the age of mass migration in the US. This is some calculations, just some descriptive calculation we did on the grandparents' place of birth in the US, so, and also others. You see that in the US, almost half of the individuals born in between 1840 and 1920 had at least one grandparent born abroad. So we tend to think of migration as a contemporaneous issue that is affecting us right now in Europe, in the US, and so on. But the size of migration flows in the 19th century was incredible, so we can learn something from the past. Lastly, I want to talk about data linkage, and in particular Italian registered data, and this is something we're trying to do in Italy. Italy is a complicated country in terms of data because it was a patchwork of different states until the unification in 1861. So we have a civil vital registration only from the unification, well, for the entire country. But we also have other things. So in particular from 1500, from the Council of Trento, the Pope decides that to collect data at the parish level. So we have baptism, marriages, and burials from each parish. This, despite the Catholic Church being the very hierarchical, that these data are not are hidden in parishes, parochial archives, so they are not easy to get. Other type of data, we have censuses from the Unity of Italy or military records. One source of data I want to talk today is the Italian parish records, and this to connect with the other part of the presentation. This is a group of individuals, an association led by an American woman that basically put together all these genealogists or enthusiasts of genealogy to go to different parishes in Italy and get access to the parish, and basically collect the information. So they typically go to the parish and they take pictures and then they transcribe the data. And they claim to have data on about 2 million of records. Data looks like this, so these are Excel files, so the name, surname, age, this is death data, age of death, name of the father, name of the mother, name of the spouse, and the parish. So we got in contact with them and said, okay, can we transform this data collected by crowdsourcing into demographic data? And so what we're trying to do is try to do some family reconstitution from genealogy data. This typically are done by historical demographers by going to the archives and reconstructing families on this data. We try to see if we can organize this information into a data set that can be used by individuals. So we want to reconstruct a biography, eventually link to different registers, including micro-census data, so for migration issues and so on. We can, why we want to do that? Because we can look at the evolution and life expectancy. This data go back eventually up to 1500. We can think about the question on social stratification and linkage on other data. So we can do it, trying to do some record linkage. There are two main strategies for doing the record linkage. Either deterministic, so we look at, we found the same exact name with the same exact information, or more probabilistic linkage. Probabilistic linkage means that we put this information into a machine learning algorithm that need to be trained by experts, and we found we have some automatic linkage that is based on this. So far, for example, this has been probabilistic linkage has been used for linking censuses in the US. There are different. So there's a paper here on the linkage of the census of 1900 and 1910, and it leverages this innovation in statistical technique and machine learning to find possible matches, and the authors claim that the accuracy rate is very high and can be done also on other type of data. Other type of data that we would like to work with is it's called portale antenati. This is something that has been done by the National Archives in Italy, and this basically has been funded completely by Family Search. Again, a genealogy society. The Family Search is the company of the the Church of the Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints that have this mission that can be defined as a baptism for the dead. So that they believe that collecting historical genealogical data is a way to save ancestors. So the church has been really at the frontier of the application of information and technology to genealogy, has digitized a multitude of historical records all over the world, and they make available the data at the family search. But it's interesting this connection between crowdsourced projects, so volunteers, company, national administrative data, and I think these are sources of information that we should tackle and we should work with. This data looks like this. This is actually the birth certificate of a great grand uncle of mine, and then it has it's handwritten text, the information on when this person is born, but also the parents and some information of the occupation of parents and or information on for example, parents who couldn't read, they need to be accompanied by others that could witness and so on. So there is, they carry a lot of information that not easy to get, but in the sense to transform into meaningful data, but very interesting. So to wrap up, what can be learned from this data? Well, we tend to think of big data as something of the future, of something now okay, how can we use, I don't know, Twitter to predict the future? How can we use information from mobile phone to understand what's happening now? But there's an immense wealth of data that is coming from the past. So this being digitalized is being made available to everyone. So we can also think of big data as something that regards not only the future, but also our history. What type of area of research are emerging from now? I think the reconstructing life course and family network from historical records, so that's our what we are somehow trying to do, but also machine learning methods to link individuals across different sources. It could be different time, or could be different places, different type of data. There's a lot of research on text recognition, particularly handwritten data from sources, or from contextual information like a newspaper and so on. And what are the general things that are coming? I think that this initiative are all trying to make data borderless, in the sense that without border, both in terms of data between different countries, the genealogy and study migration pattern of movement of people, but also linking historical contemporaneous data together, trying to reconstruct a long family history across time. Okay, thank you very much.